welcome back. So we were, before the break, talking about the moralistic and realistic pathway that people get stuck at. And what happens is when people get to that fork in the road, right, we call it an impasse. When they get to that impasse, right, it's like they don't know what to do. And then it becomes a life of kind of just back and forth and back and forth and forth and back, and you know, either you're too far over this way or you're too far over that way, and you're just stuck. And somewhere along the line, you know, we have to make that change. And for many, it doesn't happen until the latter stages of age. You know, when you start getting into your 50s, and maybe more for many the 60s, you start getting closer to God, because you know that your days are fewer than they were when you were 15 and 20. You know, so we know we don't live forever. So it's only fair to say that when we get into our 50s, that we should begin to have more of a consciousness, and we should have a consciousness of God, the world around us, and what direction we're going in. So the conscious and the conscious, both the unconscious, begin to, they should begin to change around that age. That, you know, you're aware consciously that you're not getting any younger. Therefore, you need to begin to do things differently. You need to establish different kinds of relationships. You need to look for more stability in the situation, as opposed to, you know, moving around a lot, whether it be job, whether it be geographical locations for living, whatever it be, relationship to relationship. At this point, it's a matter of stability. You need stability. When you start getting into your 50s, you should be stable, or you should be stabilizing. But you should be stable in terms of goals, career goals, employment goals, whatever they are. You should be stable by then. If you're not stable by then, well, it's a good chance that you won't be stable ever. You know, you should really be stable in direction by 40, because Freud says that young adulthood ends at 39. So as a young adult, right, according to Freud, ending at 39, when you come into 40, the young adult, the young stuff that should be shaken off by then, that you should have already been played out, right, in terms of the nonsense, the shenanigans. You should be focused. You shouldn't be wishy-washy in terms of what do you want to be when you grow up. You shouldn't even be there. And if you are, it's because somewhere in young adulthood, you didn't put in place the necessary things. You didn't put in place the necessary things. Right? So, the superego, we were talking about the two systems, and we talked about the conscience and the ideal self, and talked about the conscience punishing the ego through feelings of guilt, and that's the id. For example, the id gives in the ego. If the ego gives into the id's demands, because remember, the id is always seeking to have itself satisfied. So if the ego yields, right, then the superego is what kicks in and causes the feelings of guilt, shame, embarrassment, remorse, all those things, right? That's part of your morality, right? So the ego is supposed to say, hey, hold up, wait a minute. That's not going to be good. Not right or wrong, it's not going to be good. It's not going to be a good outcome to this. We're trying to alleviate pain. We're trying to avoid having ourselves in harmful situations. This is harm reduction. That's the role of the ego, harm reduction or harm elimination. That we don't have to do that. Let's not go that route. And if the id presses forward and wants to do it anyway, then the ego, the superego kicks in and makes you pay. makes you pay. The ideal self, or ego ideal, is an imaginary picture of how you ought to be. Now, and represents career aspirations, how to treat other people, and how to behave as a member of society. Now, it says the ideal self here. Now, again, I use the words ideal and idea much differently, because the idea self is the one that the id, right? The one that the id is about, the idea. Now, when it talks here about the ideal self, is an imaginary picture of how you ought to be. So this, again, because it's not a matter of right or wrong. This is what I want you to begin to understand. It's not a matter of right or wrong. It's a matter of staying out of harm's way and not be harmful to others, right? Because the id will just do it all. It'll hurt others and it hurts itself, right? So the conscious and the ideal self, right? The conscience can punish the, we got that. The ideal self, or ego ideal, is an imaginary picture. Now, and when you talk about an imaginary picture from an ideal perspective, right, you're just trying to be a good person in a sense of safety from the id and not damaging the self and not giving the appearance to others that you are a harmful person, right? That you are considerate, that you are thoughtful, not thoughtless. You follow me? Right or wrong is not even the issue here. This person is considerate, not inconsiderate, which is what the id is. So everything that is good of a sort, right, without a morality clause in there, everything that is good is what you want to try to emulate. We want to look like we're decent people, not indecent, because that's what the id represents. The id represents indecency, inconsiderateness. Excuse me. Right? So, and it represents, so you talking about career aspirations. So that means that the id, will destroy its ability to have a career because of its actions. So the ego has the responsibility, right? The ego ideal, it is ideal to have a career, right? Because you don't want to just go from job to job, never having any focus on, and never having any stability on the job and those kind of things like that. You want to be able to, this is what I'm going to do as a career. So I'm going to take up this training, and this is what I aspire to do, and this is what I'm going to do. Right? That's what that ego ideal. Right? So when you look at the ideal aspect of the self, the ideal self without a prescription, right? Then you start looking at those things that make for a future, a consistent future, right? When you look at how to treat other people, what to say, what not to say, because those things are harmful, right? What's wrong with being cordial? And I was reading some posts the other day, and Tiffany Bacon was on another day. A couple of days she had made some posts about bad behavior in our society of people, and it was just like I'm looking at the different comments, and I was saying to myself, the world has lost its mind. People have become so inconsiderate. And these are people, right, who even profess particular practices, which means that they should be, because of that prescription, conducting themselves in an ideal manner, not in an idea manner, right? But the world, across the board, is just like that. All over the world, man, people are so mean, they're spiteful, they're just, oh, it's just terrible. All in the name of, right? God. Whatever name they choose to use. Whatever name they choose to use. Whatever symbol that they bear. Whatever characteristic that they bear. They're still professing one thing, but doing something else. So what does that mean? What does that mean? Does that mean that the ego has yielded? I mean that the ego has yielded to the id? That the superego is punishing the self? What does that mean? Because we would like to direct these things toward God all the time. And we know that God is swift in punishment. But when you start looking at the human being, and what you are capable of doing to yourself, because of these three components of self, right? The superego is in itself designed to make you feel when you are wrong, when you have wronged someone, when you have wronged a situation, when you are immoral in your actions. The superego is designed to make you feel it, intentionally, to make you feel it. So this is real important to understand as well. I mean, listen, I like using that term. I can't. It's just what it is. That you have to understand that the human being is. Praise God, man. The human being is so complex, you can't conceptualize yourself. That's how complex the human being is. So complex that you can't even conceptualize who you are. You can't. There's an idea and an ideal self. And the idea self is grounded in the id. The ideal self is grounded in the ego and the superego. You have to understand this, man. And this is some real deep stuff. It's real. Listen, you're going to find all this stuff in my soon-to-be published book, Why Are You My Ex? Because this content is so important to understand. It's something that you have to teach your children. You can learn it yourself. Being able to apply it, I don't know. Maybe you can learn something from it, but it's a self-help piece that you really have to understand. That if you're going to get better with people, certain people who you interact with that you continue to struggle with, right? You have to look at the relationships that you have with yourself, with those three areas of yourself. When you know those three areas of yourself and you have familiarity with their role within you, then you can do something about it. It goes back to those options. But when you don't look at yourself, and you don't look at those three areas of self, the id, the ego, and the superego, and you don't look at those areas yourself, and you don't say, hey, I'm letting you just run my damn life. You look around the world and you say it's the world. Because the id makes you believe that. The id makes you believe it's the world around you. The id makes you believe it's the person you live with, the person you work with, the person you're at odds with. That's what the id makes you believe. It's their fault. That's what the id makes you believe. It convinces you of that. The ego is supposed to convince you. No, because you said such and such. That's why you have that outcome. Because you did such and such. That's why you have that outcome. That's why this situation is as it is. It's not because of them. It's not because of them. It's because of your actions. The superego steps in and says, you just went over that in your scriptural studies. We just went over that. Why would you do that? Why would you say that? That is not what you're taught. That is not what's expected of you. And then you start feeling shameful about your actions. You start feeling guilty about it. But the ear says, bunk that. He deserved it. She deserved it. And then the battle goes again. And then the ego was saying, oh, wait, stop. Hold up. You, lighten up. And talking to the superego, lighten up. And you stop, talking to the id. And then it goes back down to the superego. Because the morality of the situation that begins to fester within is where the battle begins as to why I did it. And then now it goes up into the mind. And then the mind begins to play its role. Because now remembrance becomes a part of it. That's why we're taught to remember God first and foremost in every situation. Remember God first. Remember. Remembrance is regular, not scheduled. Therefore, I may be prescribed by God to make prayers 5 times a day, but remembrance is all the time, in every circumstance. In every circumstance. Therefore, we are in constant prayer, because that's what remembrance does. It forces you over and over again to go to God, to remember God. You know, for the Christians, what would Jesus do in this circumstance? For the Muslims, what would Jesus do? We know Muhammad being the seal of all prophets, right? There will be none after him, but we believe in those that preceded him. So all the prophets had characteristics that are important to our morality. What would they do? What would Muhammad, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, what would he say? What would he do in that circumstance? What? Many of us are guilt-ridden, and it's not because of circumstances that have happened in our lives. It's because of how we've dealt with those circumstances, or how we failed to deal with the circumstances in our lives, and because of our morality, and because of our ideal living, our prescribed living. It's tearing us up. It's tearing us up. That's what we're struggling with. That is exactly what we're struggling with. We're not struggling with the failed relationship. We're struggling with the failed what's the word I'm looking for? We're struggling for what we fail to bring to fruition that is necessary for our prescribed living. So for the Muslim, for instance, marriage makes up half of our religious obligation. But it also entails a working marriage, not an abandoned marriage. You understand what I'm saying? So there's a prescription for conduct in the marriage. There's no prescription for being out of marriage other than to enter back into marriage. That's the only prescription. Because there's even a prescription for coming out of the marriage. And then once out of the marriage, there's a prescription to fulfill the obligation to that marriage. Even if you are entering into another one, you already know what the prescription is for entering, and there's a prescription for exiting. Right? So, and the last thing that's on the end of that is to how to behave as a member of society. So as an American, right, as an American, there's expectations that are had of me as a citizen. Be it I'm Native American or I've gained citizenship to be an American, right? Whichever case it is, there's an expectation. Now, no, the expectation is not that you live in America and you need to speak English. That's not, no, that's not, but you should be able to communicate with others, sure. Absolutely. I think that makes sense. That you should learn the language so you can learn how to communicate with Americans, because we don't speak that language. But that's not like a requirement. That's what makes America what it is. But for some reason, there are many who believe, and the many, they're not enough, who believe that you know, we need to not have others in America as citizens. There are many who believe that, but there's few compared to the whole. There's not even enough. But it's enough to make noise and think that that's what to make America great again means, which is a whole nother show. But you have to learn how to behave as a member of society. So some of the conduct that you see in communities that people have, right, that are not socially acceptable, they're not necessarily violations of, see, when I look at society, I look at not just the average Joe like you and me. I look at the government. I look at law, right, because it becomes lawful versus unlawful. That's when I look at things from a sociological perspective, because the other stuff is really based on your perception. So just because I'm in disagreement with a thing and I don't think that it should happen, well then I fall into the should-itises, must-itises, can't-stand-itises, but does that make it arrestable? Does that make it a violation of social norms? No. Not necessarily. But because it creates dissension within the environment, then it does affect society as a whole if not addressed properly. Like double parking next to a parking space. That's no violation of the law for that. Is it stupid? Yes. Is it inconsiderate? Yes. Does it ruffle your feathers? Yes. It's a social norm that we have. People do it all the time because they know it's not arrestable. So many things that we talk about, they're not arrestable. They don't violate the laws of the land. Therefore, it just don't matter to some. It just don't matter to most, because listen, so what you, and if you call a police officer because somebody is double parked in front of a parking space, do you think you're going to get a ticket? Not necessarily. The 911 operator might tell you, sir, you need to go handle that yourself. And if you don't think that there's going to be a positive outcome to it because of the particular person that you need to address about that, then leave it alone. They'll move. You practice some patience and wait till they move. Again, is it irritating? Is it inconsiderate? Is it mind-boggling? Yes. Is it arrestable? Does it really violate the norms of our society? No. Why? Because you see it all the damn time. I grew up in South Philly. You see double parking all up and down Broad Street, all over South Philly. Go do that in North Philly, you'll see tickets on every last one of them damn windows. Absolutely. Absolutely. Nobody can explain that one. After all of these decades, nobody still can explain why is it in South Philly you can double park anywhere you want to park, but in other areas you can't. Justification is, well, because they have all these row homes, they have 200 row homes, but they can only accommodate parking probably for about 150 of them. Whose fault is that? When we attend the event at the hall that's on Broad Street, up there, Broad and Lindley, when we attend that hall at the Elks Club, I think it is, well, there's no parking. All around. So you don't want to occupy the community's parking spaces, so you park in the middle of the street. Come out there, you're ticketed. Why? Because you ain't supposed to park there. But it's okay to occupy the parking space in front of my house. I own the home, but I can't park there because you're at an event around the corner at the Elks Club. So where do I park? So then when I call the police and say, hey, they don't live here, I do, I have the right to park here, all of these people on my block are around the corner at the club, what is the officer going to tell you? It's public parking. It's public parking. What do you want me to do? You want me to give them a ticket? There's no violation to park on a public street. So then, if you have an issue, you need to go around and talk to them. But nobody has that conversation. But it's the same way with our religious institutions. We have religious facilities that are placed in people's communities. When I go to the masjid, right, where am I parking? Where am I parking? It just so happens that the masjid that I'm a member of, the Philadelphia Masjid, right, that I can park around the masjid or around the park, which is across from the masjid, so much of our parking does not impede the community, right? But I attended another masjid that I was a member of, which was placed in the community, which means that we didn't have anywhere else to park because it didn't have its own parking lot, so we parked around in all the parking spaces, and the community was up in arms about it. Part of the problem was the fact they were Muslim and they're not Muslim. That was the first problem. You got all these Muslims, parking in front of our houses. We're Christian, or we're Catholic, or we're Jewish, and they're taking up all of our parking spaces. We don't attend that facility, and they're taking up all our parking spaces. So the Masjid Dollah finally had their own facility where they don't, necessarily occupy, because they have they have their own parking facility, and they're trying to get another facility across the street. I don't know what happened with that, but I'm just saying that they made a change. But for many years, that masjid was there. So and you have churches that do the same thing. Now, when you go to Wyoming Avenue, what is that, between 12th and 13th of Wyoming, there's a church that sits there. I've gone by there, cars are double parked up and down that street. No tickets. But then right up the street, there can be an event happening somewhere, and those cars get ticketed. Again, that's society. That's society. That's perception. Right? That's discretionary. Right? But when you're talking about overall conduct, right, that's what you have to look at. What's acceptable in a so-called moral society. So it goes on to say, behavior which falls short of the ideal self may be punished by the superego through guilt. The superego can also reward us through the ideal self when we behave properly by making us feel proud. See, so these are things that should be happening within yourself. And what happens is, as human beings, we allow our external world to dictate and define for us how we feel, when we already do that on our own. We do that on our own. We don't need anybody to do it for us. We do it on our own. All on our own. What we have conditioning. We have external conditioning as a result, that which helps us with that, right? So that means if we're internalizing, those moral values, right, then we do it on our own. So when you say that you practice a religion and you're reading for yourself, not sitting down listening to others and letting others regurgitate your spiritual content for you, you can hear the word and be excited by it. But that's coming through somebody else's filters as well. You need to read for yourself and get excited by what you read so you can internalize it for yourself and know that you know it for yourself. Because if you're only looking at that individual to give to you what your spirit needs, when that individual is gone, what do you do? What do you do? That's called a cult. That's what that is. That's a cult. So then you go drink the Jim Jones juice. Right? See, that's part of the problem. We keep looking towards leaders to give to us what we can give to ourselves. And when those leaders are no longer there, we can't do anything for ourselves. We're stuck. We begin to decompensate. We fall apart. Because we put all of our eggs in the basket of that person. Not looking at all our eggs belong in God's basket. Because He'll be there every step of the way. Right? But we don't look at things from that perspective. So when the superego has the power to reward or to punish. That's within yourself. That's what God put within us. We got that free will, which is the id. And then we have the superego, which is the part that goes to work on us. That gut feeling, that's the superego. That what you refer to as intuition, that's the super ego. That connection with God. So when you hear individuals say that man is God, doesn't mean that man supersedes the supreme being. That's that content. Because when you talk about us being created, in whose image? But what does image mean? What does image mean? What does it mean to be created in His image? The ego and the superego bring to light those things. Brings to light those things. With or without a religious practice, it's going to happen. Because you make the determination for yourself. Right from wrong. Good and bad. Good and bad. We know that eating your vegetables are good for you. But people have a hard time doing it. They make themselves literally sick. But it's good for you. Right? But you say it's bad. Right? But it's right for you. But you say it's wrong. You know, so it's things like that we have to begin to look at. So the superego does that on its own. So when you have conversation with people and, you know, it's always about right and wrong, it's always about good and bad, you have to look at what we're talking about here is the ego and the superego. To some people, being right or being wrong, right, are important. For others, being good or being bad is important. And for me, it's about good and bad. It's about good and bad. That's why I always use this quote, my own personal quote. And I tell people, make every moment a teach you about me moment instead of a tell you about you moment. It's easy for me to tell you about you. But teach me about me is most important. In other words, if I'm talking to you and I'm mad about something, I need to tell you, again, it goes back to using I statements. When you, such and such, I feel such and such. It's not blaming you, it's telling you that there's a core of me that experiences something whenever I see this behavior come from you. It's not blaming you. You may be a trigger, but there's a core of unresolved within me that comes forth. That comes forth when you do certain things, or when you say certain things. Like you hear people say, well, you ain't my mother. I never said I was. Okay, but ask yourself the question, why do you feel like she's talking to you like your mother? then you start looking at the unresolved that you have with your mother. You follow what I'm saying here? Because that's what this is really all about. It's not about that person you're talking to now. It's about your mother. Well, I don't need you to be my mother. Why? Why would you even say that? I've never tried to be your mother. You know, you ain't my father. I've never tried to be your father. You may call me daddy sometimes, but I didn't think that you took it that way. I looked at the other kind of daddy. But you understand what I'm saying? It's things that you have to really look at. You know, why you react a certain way in certain situations. Right? Why is it my character is so trying for you? Why is it aspects of character about me so trying for you? How is it you love me today and in the same day you hate me? Does it have to do with me or does it have to do with you? And 9.5 times out of 10 you're going to find it has to do with you, not me. Not me. So that's why I always tell people, make every moment a teach you about me moment instead of a tell you about you moment. Because I can always tell you off. It's easy to tell you off. It's easy to tell you about yourself. I try to tell you about me. And when I tell you about me, I have to reference when you do such and such, I feel. That's the most therapeutic statement that you can ever make. When you blank, I blank. It's not blaming you, it's telling you when these things come from you, this is how I feel. Doesn't mean you have to change? Absolutely not. You can say just the way you are, but I'm just telling you, as long as I continue to have unresolved about this particular issue within me, I can't be better with you. If you stop doing those things, that'll help me, yes. But if this is you, if this is the person that you have conditioned yourself to be, then we're going to always be at odds. Then that's not going to change. Right? That's not going to change. So when people say, well, you know, you are who you are, do you know who I am? Because in most cases, none of us know who we truly are. We have an ideal self. We have an idea self. But how many of us can say that we really know who we are? We can't. Not when you have all this unconscious self. You have this much conscious self. The rest of this is remember what's that big thing and floats in the water? I can't even think of it. It escapes me at the moment. But you can't see all of these things about yourself. You can't. Iceberg. That's what I'm looking for. Iceberg. The tip of the iceberg is above the water. If you look below the water, sometimes you got icebergs that go so far down into the water. So far down into the water because they're so humongous and they're so heavy. But you know this much about yourself. If you look up the Johari's window, it talks about things known to selves, you know, things, the hidden self, things known to others, things unknown. Listen, I'm trying to tell you, man. I'm trying to tell you, this stuff is really important. It's really important because we don't really know ourselves. We create who we are in our own minds, and we create this concept of who we are based on things that happen in our lives. Things that happen in our lives. If we focus more on the superego and we focus on developing more of that superego, a lot of these things that we're faced with in life get better. They get better, man. That's why I always say that if you're going to be in a circle of people, you know, that you're going to have close to you, make sure that circle of people has a foundation, man, that's, if not grounded in the same religion, grounded in a foundation of spirituality. That's a matter of treating people right, treating people wrong. Is not the key to this. Treating people right is. Treating people wrong is not what you do. So when you're with these people and they're treating people wrong, you need to distance yourself from them. I'm telling you, that's the problem we have in society with racism. Because regardless of what race you are, when you are focusing on unifying humanity, and you have a group, and you have a handful of people who are in that group, right, who are, you know, anti whatever. So if you're in a group with blacks and you're trying to focus on humanity, unifying humanity, and all they're talking about is hate white man, hate white man, hate white man, you get rid of them. Get rid of them. Yeah, I'm telling you. I don't want to hear that dialogue. And it's the same way with whites. If you are with other whites and you have other whites talking about these niggas, this and this, that, and the other, and hate black people, and you need to get away from them. And the problem is we're not having that discussion. We're not having that discussion, nor are we distancing ourselves from those people in so many ways, and we're keeping this alive. When you give no credence to these kinds of thinkers, when you separate yourself from these kind of thinkers, we begin to focus on what we need to do to change the conditions of this world. We have grandchildren, folks. We have great-grandchildren, folks. We have the power to change these conditions, but we have to start having honest dialogue with others in our groups. We need to start refining our groups. I don't want to have that kind of discussion. You're not going to have that kind of discussion around my family. You're not going to have that kind of discussion with me. I'm not going to indulge in that kind of dialogue. I'm going to correct you. I'm going to correct you. So, all of these things are necessary because we're still talking about what is appropriate in our society. It is not appropriate in our society to talk about hating another group of people based on their skin color. Like not the person, like not what they do. Let me say that again. Like not the person, like not what they do. This is scriptural stuff, folks. And we have a lot of people with this kind of hateful dialogue using the name of God. Yes. All in the name of God. They're using this language. They're using this dividing language. They're using this separatist language. They're using this hateful language. All in the name of God. So it goes back to an immoral society. Because when you look at society, you look at government. Immoral. Immoral. There's nothing moral about government actions. Nothing. It's business. It's about each state controlling its people. It's about the federal government dictating and defining our society. As immoral as they are, they want morality in your actions and my actions as American citizens, or as citizens of America. That's what it comes down to. So when you adhere to the government of God, that's your superego. When you adhere to the government of God, you can't go wrong. When you put God first, God will deal with all the immoral stuff. It would deal with all those people who want to punish you because of skin color, because of socioeconomic status. He'll deal with all that. Remember, we've been warned before. When the floods came, people were warned over and over again. Get it right, he's going to punish you. I heard Minister Farrakhan say that. God's going to punish you if you don't stand up for what is right. You have to stand up for what is right. As a person. And I started this conversation off talking about what benefits me comes by me helping somebody else. Help somebody else. Help more than yourself. Because that's what this comes down to. Help more than yourself. When you help somebody else, you're helping others. Thank you for joining in. As always, I appreciate all of you. You can be doing anything else on a Sunday morning from 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. than listening to me. But for some reason, that's the choice you made. And I appreciate it. I love you all for it. I will see you on Tuesday for the Wise View. Thank you for tuning in today. This is Spot. And go Denver. Let's have it.